Welcome to the Measure Success Podcast. This is Carl J. Cox. I'm excited to be with you today where we talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. We have an exciting guest here today, Sean Glaze. He's going to talk. We're going to talk about him, who Sean is. He's a team leadership expert, engaging speaker, and the founder of Great Results Team Building. He transforms disconnected groups into high-performing teams, and with over 2 decades of coaching experience, right? So didn't just start doing this yesterday. And he also has many books, including Rapid Teamwork. He equips leaders with practical tools to boost collaboration, culture, and results. So, Sean, welcome to the Measure Success Podcast.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Carl. Thrilled to be here. Looking forward to a good conversation with you and your audience.
Absolutely. So, one of the things we're just going to get started off here, which is I was like, what is that story that humbled you from the beginning? And you said, and I didn't tell you this before, I've coached 25 seasons of sports. And so you mentioned to me your first season was 5-21. I can't imagine that because I didn't have I didn't say everything was perfect, but I didn't have a losing season. And so I would have been going crazy. In one of my first games I coached in baseball, our team lost 18-1. And I thought I was the worst coach in the world. And there's a fun story of where that ended. I won't go in that today because, Sean, this is about you. But tell us about that humility you ran into of when you started sports coaching, right? And what happened?
My background, and of course, I appreciate the introduction. Now I get to work with organizations and leaders with, speaking and facilitating and coaching. But oh goodness, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I was a very different individual. And as a young leader, I very definitely face planted in that role. And it was those failures that obviously lead you to hopefully close the gap and identify those things that you needed to change that now I'm able to share with a lot of other leaders. But that experience was as a basketball coach. And I was a high school literature teacher and a basketball coach. And it was as a basketball coach that I had been an assistant. I had won a number of games as a young coach with ninth grade teams and then with JV teams. And you think you're really good because you've got a whole lot of talent. So we won a lot of games as a JV coach because, again, we were probably just more talented than some of the other teams we were playing. And I got that very first head coaching position. And just like a new leader who's starting their business or somebody that's just gotten a new position as a manager in whatever organization, you go in with these high expectations of how I'm going to do things. You got all this ideas about the X's and O's or the scheme or the strategy that you want to implement that's going to change the world. And by the end of that very first season, I'm staring in a mirror frustrated because I'd done everything that I knew to do. And our team had underperformed. We were probably talented enough to be middle of the region in terms of our record and our performance. And we had really underachieved, and we were 5-21. And I remember being in that locker room at the end of the season after that very last loss in the region tournament, where you're playing the best team because you had the worst record. And of course, you walk off, and we'd kind of had our backsides handed to us, and probably lost by about 20. And you give that end of the season obligatory talk to the kids. Hey, ladies, I'm thrilled at the progress we've made. I'm excited about what we have coming back. And we got everybody back, and I know we're going to be better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I meant every word. But the message was probably flat because inside, I'm devastated and I'm disappointed too because we just lost 21 games. I hadn't lost 21 games the entire time I'd coached up to that point. And so you go over and you look in the mirror and you splash some water on your face and you look up and you realize it's the person staring back at you who's responsible for making things better. And it was in that moment that I realized something needed to change. I just needed to figure out what it was I wasn't doing that we needed to do better.
And so there has to be, so I'm curious. So what happened next, right? So you coached the next season, right? What made you to be a better coach going forward? What were the things and principles that you put in place? And what were those aha moments for yourself of what you missed during that your worst season that you coached?
Yeah, well, that's ultimately what I've kind of dedicated my life to and been passionate about for the last 20 years, Carl. And that is, again, I think that as leaders or managers or business owners, we don't get better just because the calendar changes to the next year. Experience by itself doesn't make us better in our role. It's the awareness. It's those things we notice in our experiences that become awareness, that maybe shift our beliefs, that change our behaviors, that ultimately build a different culture and get different results. And so I left the locker room largely because of my assistant coach with an idea in my back pocket that I wanted to explore a little bit more. And the reason that I walked out of that locker room with a little bit better awareness is because as the kids are walking out, there's Allison and there's Zandy and there's Casey, and they're walking out one by one as individuals. Nobody with their arms around somebody else's shoulder or talking or pairing up. Again, everybody's kind of chin in their chest and walking out. And my assistant coach at the time taps me on the shoulder and says, "Coach, if we're going to have a better season, man, we got to build better relationships." And I had kind of one of those aha moments because I was always the left brain rational, let's just take care of the logical systems and strategy side. And I had completely neglected the culture that would have allowed that strategy and obviously our talent to have succeeded. And we hadn't spent a whole lot of time on relationships and standards and trust and accountability and appreciation and all the things that I eventually learned were unbelievably vital to team performance. And so it was really in the midst of that summer between my first and second year as a head coach that I threw myself into reaching out to people about team building and about leadership and about culture and about connections and going and I'm in my Jeep Cherokee driving around the Southeast and talking to some college coaches, even not about X's and O's or press breakers or inbounds plays, but what do you do to build the camaraderie and the expectations and the internal culture that allows that strategy to succeed. And that was, again, the beginning of what's been a lifelong focus upon how do leaders build and sustain a more positive and profitable culture.
When you were talking there, it reminded me of story of the important relationships. And I don't know if you're familiar with Anson Dorrance.
Yes.
He was the former
At
University of North Carolina women's soccer coach who won 22 national championships. And he just recently, which is really special for Damon Nahas, he's now taken over, won his first interim year, won the national championship. But one thing happened one time, he was very, very focused on effectiveness and doing things well. And they're like, well, how can we make our practices more efficient? And what they used to do is in their stretching, they used to have it be pretty informal and enabled the girls to the women to talk together, right? The athletes to talk together and gain relationships. Well, he took that part of it out and they just started cratering. Like they completely started creating this team chemistry. Mm-hmm. And he recognized that was the why. Here he thought something was inefficient, ineffective, but it really was this really critical relationship component that needed to be a part of it. That ultimately was the difference with them being successful or not successful in the field. Now, don't get me wrong. You need to have good athletes. You need to have good tactics. You need to have good strategies, right? I'm not saying you don't need to have those things. But when the chemistry part was broken because he had changed the standard practices, mm-hmm. that did things. So we're going to get into business here, folks, in a minute. This isn't just a sports channel thing, as you know, who people listen to podcasts. But of course, I'm always curious because they correspond.
Absolutely.
There's relationship. So I'm curious for you when you started to build in the relationships with the basketball team. Mm-hmm. What did you do differently to start fostering that where they actually cared about each other more than they did in the past?
I think that your story with Anson Dorrance is fantastic. And he was one, again, the book, The Man Watching, that he published years and years ago about, building the culture and establishing their values and everything. And what he does with the competitive cauldron were things that I used in basketball that, again, I think that leadership and teamwork translates across industries and situations. And the same things that build a team in basketball, build a team in whatever business you're in, because ultimately people are people and teams are teams, and the same issues we had in our locker room absolutely apply to your conference room, whatever organization or industry you're a part of. And I think that if you're an effective leader, you realize that there are things that you can address successfully, but there are also things that you can, if you're intentional about it, you can avoid having to deal with if you're proactive on the front end and building some of that culture in, so you don't experience some of the issues that kind of unhealthy cultures end up kind of providing. That said, the thing that we did, and this is again part of the talk sometimes when I'm in a conference and when I'm working with leaders, I'll mention, our focus as a coaching staff, specifically starting with me, completely shifted once you had a little bit of an appreciation for what made teams successful. Because every organization, everyone listening to this podcast is in the talent acquisition business. We're all going to succeed based upon talent. Talent is always going to be the floor of your success, right? You're never going to be, that's going to kind of determine where you can be. That's going to be the floor of. But I think that talent alone, while it's essential, is never sufficient. And so you've got to have good scheme. You've got to have good strategy. That's where people oftentimes as an organization invest a lot of time and money, and they're going to go into a retreat to make sure they're mapping out their strategy for the next quarter, for the next year. But I think what gets neglected at times, and what obviously I neglected as a young coach, was that third component that is required for success and sustained results and retention, and that is the culture side. And that is, how do you build those relationships and establish trust? And yes, absolutely clarify goals, but make sure that people are engaged because they see how what they're doing and their efforts affect something that they care about. How do you build those relationships? Well, you build in experiences, because I think it goes back to experiences allow people to have a different level of awareness when you begin to emphasize things. And when people come to a training program that I'll lead for an organization, or to one of my keynotes, if there's 250 people in the audience, there's 250 different versions of my talk that walk out the doors. And so I'm very intentional about, when there's something that I think is a key takeaway, that you make sure that you hopefully wrap that in an experience or a story or an activity that makes it memorable, so that they can apply it based upon their circumstances. Because ultimately, again, awareness is, what do we notice in our experience? Because we all have interactions with people, but the communication you have with your team members is going to be different in their minds when they walk away than in your minds when you walk away. So I think that building into our practices, as you said, we actually had, form and free throw shooting stuff early in practice before we started with our full court stuff and got into transition and all the other stretching stuff that we did. And those free throws and the form shooting were when they had partners, and we would mix up the partners, and it gives them a chance to build some of those relationships in a less formal situation. And when you change those pairings, you give people a chance to build relationships with people that they wouldn't have appreciated or understood or connected with. And I think that oftentimes that collaboration that organizations want to see, collaboration is always going to be built on the foundation of a trusting relationship. And it's the same way in terms of accountability conversations or anything else. When you build relationships and you strengthen relationships and empathy, I think that performance and accountability absolutely improve.
I think that's an excellent example there of what you described. Is just sometimes it's the most, once again, the simple ways. Just that example Anson Dorrance did, just letting them be more social at the beginning of practice, mm-hmm. right? And you effectively were doing the same thing with the free throws. And then, very importantly, though, helping to, one of the biggest challenges in any team in business or in the sports courts or sports fields is that people falling into, 2 or 3 people, these little teams, right? They break up into, right? And next thing you know, they're fighting against each other, right? They're not on the same side. And when you encourage or even force people to interact that wouldn't typically interact, it helps encourage communication, helps move towards that. And it could be really powerful. I literally was just talking with a client yesterday, and they mentioned they have some overseas clients, and they said, the planned meetings were good, but the power was in the dinner discussions afterwards. Right. You're right. I find this often in strategic facilitation. It's the facilitation's good, but when you hear the noise in between, right? When people are less on, they're not on guard as much, right? And they're willing to just open up and share their concerns or their hopes or their dreams. That's when things get really powerful. And so that's where things move through. Now, Sean, I'm going to, forgive me a moment, I'm just going to do a quick little sponsorship piece here, intro on the midway here. As we always are, thanks our sponsorships. This is going to be one of our internal sponsorships. We have opened up, as many of you know, our new firm, 40 Accounting, CPA firm. We do bookkeeping, financial reporting, as well as taxes for small to mid-sized business, as well as the personal side as well. So if you have interest in that, we are here to help and support you. You could just go to 40accounting.com. All right, Sean, we're going to move forward now to our next steps and learning a little bit more about you, what you do today. So first of all, how did you change? How did you transition from being a teacher and coach to being a business coach?
Well, I think that, ultimately I'm doing the exact same thing now that I did for 20 years in classrooms with American or British literature. And ultimately it's, how do you share knowledge that's going to hopefully be entertaining and engaging and helpful to others in some capacity. And I've just got a different audience and a little bit of different content based upon my experiences and how those takeaways can hopefully be something that other people put in their back pocket and apply in their circumstances. And I am very much aware that probably, at least a third of your audience aren't going to be athletes or sports fans. And that's the same way in the audiences that I work with in different events. And I want to make sure that we emphasize that some of the takeaways, while yes, they are kind of taken from my background as a basketball coach, they are unbelievably relevant and vital insights for you to be able to apply with your team, regardless of the industry that you're leading a team on. And I think that, specifically every organization, every team is going to have those silos, those small little cliques of people. And I'll sometimes have somebody call me, "Hey, Sean, I want you to come in. We've got a problem with silos. I want you to help us break down our silos." I'm like, "No, you don't understand. Silos are evidence of shared backgrounds or shared experiences or shared desires and strong relationships. You don't break those up. What you want to do is to hopefully build a stronger network between those existing silos so that those people feel comfortable sharing and requesting information and admitting mistakes to people outside of just that clique that they'd already become comfortable with." So I think that, ultimately, as a leader, I think that the number one takeaway is when you build trust and when you build relationships and when you clarify what we're here to do together, then all the other stuff is eventually going to give itself a chance to fall into place regarding the expectations and the accountability and obviously the performance.
When you're working with your clients in the coaching side, what is one of the most common obstacles that you see they run into? Right, they're coming to you for a reason, right? They're stuck, right? And they haven't figured out how to be more effective at work or in their life or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of business applied effectiveness, right? With who they are. What is one of those key things that's holding individuals back from being successful?
I think that ultimately people reach out to me as a coach when they come upon a system or a symptom that is damaging their performance. And whether that is somebody that is running a restaurant or somebody that is managing you as just a part of a larger organization. When you have one of those kind of squish moments that I talk about, where I came downstairs one day and my wife's standing in where our first level had flooded and there's going to be that flood was a symptom of the problem. But a lot of times we just focus on cleaning up the symptom and we don't ever get to what's the problem behind the symptom that you're having to deal with that's damaging team performance. And there's always something behind it. And I'll use the same analogy of, there is a window that we look out from above our kitchen sink where you can see the little pond that we kind of live on, a small lake north of Atlanta. And there was almost always a spider web there. And so you go and wipe off the spider web. Next morning, it's there again. You wipe off the spider web next morning. And until you take care of the spider web keeps coming back, right? And I think that the large challenge that leaders, and there's going to be a variety of different ways that it presents itself, but ultimately I think it goes back to that idea of awareness. And we need people outside of ourselves to provide the perspective, whether it's of experience or just of a different, position within our organization to help us see things a little bit more clearly than what we do from where we're at in the seat that we're in. And I think that ultimately coaches or mentors can provide information or can provide questions and let that curiosity lead to insights that then hopefully that leader can apply to address something beyond just the symptom level.
So if you can, like what's a really specific example of that? Like what is that spider, so to speak, in a person, right, that they're ignoring?
I think a lot of times, and this was honestly probably true for me as a young coach, is I did believe, as Anson Dortz did, let's take away the talking part, let's make it more efficient. I think that efficient is never effective when it comes to relationships and trust. You need to be intentional about taking the time. Just like as a parent, you can't say, I'm gonna build in 5 minutes of quality time with my kid. That's not quality time. Quality time is a result of quantity time that's sometimes unexpected. And you can be intentional about scheduling quantity time, and quality time is going to be part of that. It's the same way with your team. You can schedule a retreat, you can schedule a dinner, you can schedule a weekly lunch or whatever that might be to give people a chance, but you can't necessarily design or force relationships or trust to occur. It's something you kind of hopefully build the environment for those things to occur naturally, largely. But when you talk about the idea of what is one of those examples, I think that psychological safety and people feeling safe to risk admitting a mistake or to risk asking a question are one of the areas where just about every leader you talk to can always be a little bit better at. And the symptom that you see is somebody's quiet in a meeting. The symptom that you see is somebody doesn't necessarily offer up a request for advice. Hey, I'm dealing with this. What are some ideas that you might have? So they go it alone because they don't feel safe in the team or the leader encouraging those mistakes to be shared or encouraging somebody to ask for help. And I think that idea of building in safety where people are in the midst of your meetings, and I talk about this a lot with leaders, every meeting you have is a culture building opportunity. And are you just using meetings as an information waterfall that could have been an email, or are you using meetings as an opportunity to really celebrate where you've seen your values acted out, and you want to make sure that people are acknowledged for that and recognized, because what gets rewarded is going to get repeated. Are you taking a time in those meetings to make sure that you're asking for people to contribute instead of just being passive receptacles of information that they're supposed to go off and do? So I think there are a number of ways you can be intentional about improving your awareness as a leader. And a lot of that goes back to making sure that your team feel safe and encouraged, and that you reward and appreciate anytime somebody admits a mistake or somebody offers a question or takes a risk, because ultimately that's going to give other people permission to do the same.
Yeah, good. No, I appreciated you going a deeper level into that. And it is fascinating of that safety component. As Sean, we work with at 40 Strategy, we work a lot with CEOs. And one of the problems of the lack of safety concern is employees and managers will not necessarily tell CEOs the truth. Right? I mean, it's like we laugh about it, but it's like,
but it's because it's absolutely true. It's a
yeah,
very,
they're afraid to lose their job, right? They're afraid to lose their ability to pay their rent or mortgage, right? And so the problem with this is, just like you were unaware as a coach of what was missing in the relationships, many CEOs aren't aware of that truth. They just think, oh, well, everyone's honest with me, because why wouldn't they be? And they don't understand that they haven't created the safety for people to communicate honesty. Where I learned this for the first time was, I remember saying the same dumb joke growing up in my accounting, when I was accelerating the accounting path. And then I finally got to the point of being a CFO and then ultimately a CEO. And the same joke got funnier.
Right.
Okay. It wasn't any funnier, but because of my position, people paid attention to me and tried to make me feel good, right? Because of my position. It had nothing to do with how good the joke was, yeah. Right? And this is one of those things that CEOs miss, is that because of the fear in an employee of being transparent, telling the truth about the real gaps that are happening, the CEO's not aware, they're not hearing the truth because of that same aspect. What have you found in your experiences the best way to break that so people can feel safety and truth and they get to a better state?
Well, I think the first thing is that awareness of, as a leader, I am necessarily because of hierarchy, oftentimes going to be removed from the front lines and the people that do see the things that are going to most affect our business or our team. And how can I, as a leader, not first be a victim? Because once you acknowledge, yes, that's an issue, is that distance between me and some issues that might not be communicated up the chain, you can either be a victim and say, oh, well, woe is me. I guess that's just going to be the case. I'm going to have to suffer and it's somebody else's fault. We talk a lot about in my events and certainly when I'm working with leaders one-on-one, what part of my leadership led to that? That's a pretty powerful question. Anytime you're in a situation, if you want your team, if you want yourself to take more ownership, to look in the mirror, what part of my leadership led to that? Because there's always going to be an answer. And I think that for leaders, one of the things you can do is to acknowledge my people are going to be more willing to share when I become more curious and appreciative of what they share. And I think that taking the initiative is always on the leader's shoulders. And what you do, other people will certainly emulate. And if you are not communicative, you're going to be in a non-communicative organization. And if you communicate and you're a little bit more transparent and you're curious and you're humble, you're going to see other people begin to emulate that. And again, it goes back to oftentimes the quality of our leadership is going to be, seen in the quality of the questions we ask. First, the questions we ask ourselves, and then the questions that we're asking the people that we work with and depend on. And one of those questions that, again, I think is unbelievably powerful internally is, what part of my leadership led to that? The other that I think is a really powerful feedback question that you can open up with if you've not done this before is to go and walk and peek in. Again, one of the best principles when I'm teaching English for 2 decades, Carl, one of the best principles I ever had wasn't the one who was holed up in their office just taking care of paperwork. They were actually out in the hallways and peeking in and being grateful for, hey, thank you so much. And I noticed as you did so and so, and they were personable and they were involved and they were out and seen instead of being kind of hidden in that office tucked away. And I think that as leaders, we want to kind of do that walk and spend time with our people and let them know that we're interested and involved and engaged and that we're curious about, hey, what are some things that you're seeing that I might not see that would help me be better in this role for you? That's a powerful question. What's something that I might not be seeing that you're seeing that would help me be better in my role? And a lot of times you may be surprised at some of those answers and how simple some of those things are that you can do to make things better for the whole organization.
Sean, of course, called the Measure Success podcast. How do you measure success with your clients?
I talk about, as a leader, I think that the two things, and this is very broad, kind of 40,000 foot view, the two things that measure success for any leader are your results and your retention. Because as a coach, you might win a lot, but if I'm driving people into the dirt because of how I'm coaching, they're not going to want to stay around and you're going to lose good people, even if you've gotten good results in the short term. So I think that it's not just those results you get, but it's the people and the retention, and are people actively recruiting others to come in because, man, you want to work for this person, or man, you want to be in this organization because we're so good at blank and blank and blank. And I'm so comfortable and I feel so appreciated and people are curious to get my input. When you get somebody being an advocate for your organization or your team with those types of things, you're doing the right work as a leader. And I think that ultimately that's a difficult shift. And again, going back to those coaching conversations, the hardest shift I think that people make as an early leader is realizing that they are excellent in a technical role, which is why they were promoted to a leadership role. Right. Which is a completely different skill set in terms of understanding I'm not going to succeed based upon my activities. I'm going to succeed based upon how I can serve and support people in their activities. As a coach, I never made a free throw. As a coach, I never got a steal. As a coach, I never set a screen. Our success as an organization was how well could I get other people to do those things that made us successful. And I think that empowering them and getting their input is something that made me better later in my career, and that hopefully leaders can kind of take away and apply to their circumstances as well.
Thank you, Sean, for that answer. Sean, I'm curious about your own, I'm always curious about people who are successful in their own lives and succeeding. You speak, you've had 3 books you've been able to change your career so successfully. These are not things that everyone has the opportunity to do. what type of habits have you developed yourself? Here we are recording this right around the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
What type of habits have you done for yourself that you've learned so you could be consistently effective?
I'm still learning, man. I think that the best leaders are absolutely still going to be good students and are going to be humble and hungry to change and improve their habits no matter where you're at. As soon as you think that you're good, and again, this kind of goes to, I know I promised we weren't going to talk about any of my books, but my most recent one that was published a couple of years ago was Staying Coachable. And I think that that's what a lot of times leaders do is we reach a level of complacency where we get comfortable. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable. But I think that the idea of complacency is I allow myself to coast instead of realizing if I stay hungry and I stay humble and I continue to want to learn and improve, that I give my team permission and an opportunity to do the same. And we've got 3 grown kids and very, very grateful because I know that not everything that they've done is the result of their parents, but we enjoy spending time with. And I think that's a huge part of success is you want to continue to be hopefully a positive example that they can emulate because ultimately it's what you do that is a far more powerful example than what you're saying. And I think that as leaders, your team is always watching you and are you aligned and is your integrity something that they see? And again, if again, something that I would oftentimes share, if you were put on trial for being a humble and hungry and servant kind of based leader, would your team have enough evidence to convict you? And I think that, that idea of what are you doing to give people examples and memories of the person that you want them to see you as, and are you continuing to grow so that person doesn't begin to wither or so to answer your question, I think that I'm not where I want to be. I think that everything is hopefully in progress and continuing to grow. And I'm reading and hopefully building relationships like I have with you, with people that I'm impressed by that give me reason and inspiration to continue to grow in different areas. And that's why people are listening to your podcast, honestly, is they want to be better themselves.
Well, you seem to answer, and what I like to ask is how do you measure success in your personal life? And I think you said it there earlier, which is if you are doing the things that you say you should be doing, which is, of course, many people say is integrity, that's
Mm-hmm.
how you're measuring your success in your life. Is that a fair, at
I
least
think
one of
that
the
would be
principles for yourself?
very much so. Yeah, I think integrity would definitely be one of my personal values.
Yeah, and you said that, and you described it. I think we have 4 kids, my wife and I, and it is interesting of how once again the actions speak louder than the words all the time. And it's important to say positive words, but our negative words can be really impactful in a negative way, right? But at the same time, we need to have principles and still correct, right? And there's truth. That's like then that goes in line with coaching and managing, and if we don't get to that point of once again closer to transparency
Mm-hmm.
to improve where we are, who we are, what we're doing, get through that veil of challenge that we have, then we can have more success ultimately. Sean, I always like to ask my guests, what's a book, not one of your own books, but what's a
Mm-hmm.
book maybe you recently read or maybe read a long time ago that if our audience hasn't read yet, you highly recommend they should?
Oh wow! You see behind me a little bit of, and this is not the real kind of library we have over in another room where I am just a voracious reader, and I'm probably not as good as I should be about coming away from a book. What's the 1 or 2 things that I'm definitely going to be consistent about implementing as a result of reading? Uh, I would say for any leader. One of the things that I think was really terrific, and I'm a huge fan of Bob Berg, the Go Giver, and being somebody who is seeking to serve, and that you build relationships because you're interested in people and you want to help. I think that the greatest marketing anybody does, regardless of industry, is helping. And if I can help somebody as a leader, that's going to be marketing for the other services I have as a coach or a speaker or a facilitator. And the more helpful you are, the more willing people are to refer you and to lean on you again, kind of trust you moving forward. So love the Go Giver. I love in terms of as a speaker, kind of, oh goodness, Made to Stick, I think, by Chip and Dan Heath is
Yep.
fantastic in terms of, just kind of being intentional about making your stories and making your messages a little bit more memorable for your team. I think that that's something that absolutely translates. And I don't know. I'm drawing a blank as far
Oh
as
no, those are two good
those are
recommendations
two
though,
good ones.
Sean. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't feel like you have to go through your whole library of books, but those are really good. Sean, how can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
I appreciate you asking. You can find me on LinkedIn at Sean Glaze. Find my website, greatresultsteambuilding.com. I obviously am on some of the others, not quite as active on Instagram or uh, Facebook and stuff like that. But if the audience is curious and interested about hopefully being able to take advantage of some of my content on my website, there's a way you can sign up and get free access to over 50 or 60 different handouts in my team leadership toolbox. And I would be absolutely thrilled to be able to have a conversation and talk with anybody if I can be of service.
Sean, thank you so much for being a guest on the Measure Success podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Carl.
To everyone else who's listening, we hope you've enjoyed this. Please share and comment and like. And Sean has done a great job in his career of transitioning and his learning principles from being an educator and coaching, and then moving on to being able to help professionals in their life to be more effective. And that's ultimately what we all want, right? We all want to grow. We want to be more effective. And I think Sean is truly this reason why we put him on the podcast, is truly one of those difference makers out there that you should really seriously consider reaching out to connect. As we always like to say, wishing you the very best at measuring your success. Have a great day.